My name is Matt Sokup, and I am very excited for this course, as Xamarin.Forms has undergone an evolution of late, from a framework which had a reputation for only being usable for very simple apps or prototyping, to where now full-featured and beautiful apps can be built from it. When developing with Xamarin.Forms, more likely than not, you will find your app needing to do at least 4 general things, and it will be these 4 things that this course will cover. The first is to accept and transform user input. Your app has a responsibility to the user to make it as easy as possible for them to enter data, and there will be times when the app will need to control or possibly react to the entered data immediately, so it's important for you to have the tools to do so with. Next is to display varying and dynamic data. If the user has entered data, of course they are going to want to see it, and the app should make it as organized, interesting, and pleasing to look at as possible, all the while reacting to dynamic changing data on the fly with a minimal amount of code being written. To maintain a professional and polished look, a consistent user interface needs to be maintained. But even more important from a developer standpoint, that interface should be able to be updated easily, again with a minimal amount of code. Finally, there will come a time when the app will need to tweak and display controls specific to the underlying platform. I will show you techniques to accomplish this without resorting to the dreaded custom renderers. The app that I will be building throughout the course is a recipe manager app. The app allows the user to view a list of recipes, add a brand new recipe, see recipe details, and also edit an existing recipe. Some characteristics of the grid layout are, they are extremely easy to build with. Once you see how to divide one layout into a grid pattern, it will be difficult to resist the temptation to do so with everything. They are expressly made for 2-dimensional layouts, whereas a stack layout is made for 1 dimension, either vertical or horizontal, and an absolute layout positions elements exactly wherever on the screen. Grid layouts deal with arrays of horizontal and vertical elements. And it's important to note that grids are not tables. There is not a header, and there are no grid lines, and the grid itself does not appear visibly on screen. It is simply a way to hold other visual elements. In this demo, I'm going to spice up the recipe cell a bit with the grid. The grid will allow the cell to easily convey more information in an easy to read and hopefully pleasing to look at manner. Right now I have the recipe list page open. There's not much there quite yet, only the text cell, so to make room for the grid, I'm going to delete it. Next, I'm going to add in some properties to the list view that, while not related to the grid itself, they'll make the list view display look better. Separator visibility being none removes the lines between the cells, and has uneven rows, much like you learned in the first module of table views, indicates to the list view that the cells may be of different heights, which the list view will be taking advantage of in a future demo. Now I'm going to create the cell that will host a grid, defining the height for the cell and an overall margin around the content view. Now with the setup out of the way, the good stuff, the grid. I'm setting the space between the rows on the grid to 0. Now I'm going to paste in a bunch of rows. So within the row definitions collection, there are 5 rows defined. The first 3 have number values specified for the height. This makes them an absolute height, so Xamarin.Forms will make each row that many units high. The last 2 rows are star rows, and each will split the remaining space left over after all the absolute rows are done claiming their space. Next come the columns. All of these are stars or proportional. That means each column will be exactly the same width. Now I'm going to start building the visual interface of the grid. This box view is the background for the meal type. It's going to be in the first row and the first column, which are 0-based, and it's going to span all 3 columns. The label that holds the meal type comes next. Bindable native views are 100% native or completely iOS, Android, or UWP controls that can be accessed from the core project XAML files. Properties in the native view that control display, things like color or text, are bindable in the view model. No work on your part needs to be done in order to make this happen in the native view. The core project can even handle events surfaced from the native view. And it is possible to invoke constructors and static factory methods on the native view, but you cannot invoke regular instance functions. This is how you would consume a third-party iOS-specific control from within Xamarin.Forms. The first thing I want to point out here is that the control that is being consumed has already been developed by somebody else, but they did not develop it with the intention of it being used within Xamarin.Forms. The first thing to do, as happens every time when referencing another assembly or namespace, is to add the XML namespace to the XAML file. A lot of the time, the native view will be referenced in a separate DLL. However, there is a new attribute here to notice, target platform. This will indicate to the XAML parser to only include this namespace when building for iOS. Finally, reference the class name of the native view to be placed on the screen, preferenced by the XAML namespace. Note the use of the absolute layout attached properties here. Those are not properties of the native view. Rather, they are attached to an absolute layout, much like a grid's attached properties. A while back, Google introduced the concept of a floating action button. You're probably familiar with it already. It's usually a round button that hangs out in the lower right corner of the screen and performs actions per the screen, like adding new recipes. It is a built-in control at Android, and because I'm going to eventually be adding more functionality to it, I've already subclassed it here, calling it FoodieFab. Running the app very quickly, you can see that the two buttons have been added to the screens, but they won't do anything when tapped. Natively, they are firing events, but I need to somehow tie that native event to an action within Xamarin.Forms to cause something to happen, namely a blank edit screen to appear, and this is usually done through commanding. So now I will show you how to set up commanding on native views, so native events can be hooked up and bound to command properties on view models in Xamarin.Forms.